This is episode 80 of That Shakespeare Life. This episode is brought to you in part by Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation App, the only audio Shakespeare pronunciation app which is designed to remove fears about how to speak Shakespeare's language so that his plays are accessible to everyone. Find out more about this app in today's show notes and stay tuned after the episode for how you can learn more.
Hi, I'm Richard Dutton, author of Shakespeare's Theatre, A History, and Professor Emeritus at Ohio State University. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my new friend, Cassidy Cash.
The late Queen, by her own orders, has neither been opened or indeed seen by any living soul save 3 of her ladies. It's been taken to Westminster, the palace all hung with mournings. The council waits on her continually with the same ceremony, the same expenditure, down to her very household and table service.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
The superstitions surrounding the ideas of ghosts, death, and what happened to your soul as your body approached its demise were all inspiring topics for the plays of William Shakespeare. It turns out that these superstitions were not only fuel for dramatic presentations on the stage, but formed the foundation of pretty creepy tales about the real life of one of England's most famous monarchs, Queen Elizabeth I. According to tales from her handmaiden, Elizabeth was paranoid to a fault, scared of dying, and left specific orders in her will for how her body was to be handled that defied the traditions of the land and left a set of at least 6 individuals doing work that was scarier and grosser than the gravedigger in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Here this week to share with us the real-life history of the 3 weeks after the death of Elizabeth I and the surprising, often macabre, realities of what those weeks entailed by order of the Queen herself is the man who wrote his PhD thesis on the living death of Elizabeth I, Dr. James Alsop. James is a teacher and researcher of English literature, writing about early modern drama, living death, and education. His thesis, Playing Dead, Living Death in Early Modern Drama, takes a look at occurrences of what he calls living death. It's a liminal state that exists between life and death and can be approached from either side. He takes a look at these living deaths in early modern English drama and combines a broadly historist approach with explorations of dramaturgy, ideas of stagecraft, and performance. James joins us today to tell us about what his research has uncovered about one creepy moment that occurred during the life of William Shakespeare. Hello, James. Welcome to the show.
Hello, it's really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Elizabeth left instructions for how her body was to be treated after she died, but how did she communicate these wishes? Was this actually a part of her will?
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, it was part of her will. She wanted to not be embalmed, and she wanted to be treated as though she was still living. It's pretty crazy.
Did the people responsible for handling what your article calls the living death situation understand their instructions beforehand, or was this a surprise?
Well, that depends on what you believe. I suspect they probably would have maybe expected it from her, because you've got every indication before she died that she may have been suffering from some kind of severe depression. It sounds as though she'd been anticipating her death for some time, hence her instructions in the will. Apparently, according to various sources, including Sir Robert Carey, she might have been plagued with guilt over the death of Mary, Queen of Scots. Apparently, she shed many tears and sighs, manifesting her innocence that she ever gave consent for the death of that queen. And according to one of her handmaidens, Elizabeth Southwell, a playing card with the figure of the Queen on it had been found on her throne with a pin driven through the head. It sounds very dramatic. I've got no idea if that's true or not. But yeah, well, we've got every indication that she was anticipating a death, and assumedly her handmaidens were quite close to her. they would have seen this coming. You've got rumours, again, unverified by any sort of definitive source, that she was so scared of dying that she once stood for 15 hours at a time. Her handmaidens laid cushions around the room just so that in case she fell over, she'd have something soft to land on. But yeah, she certainly seems to have thought about her own death a lot.
Numerous places in James's write-up suggest Elizabeth was in a coffin made of lead and sealed, but there is at one point a reference to wood as well. James, it's our understanding that coffins would not become a normal aspect of burial until after Elizabeth's death. So why did she choose a coffin? And was she laid out in this coffin while her maids were attending to her body?
Yeah, you're right. Not everyone would have had a coffin. Most people being buried at the time would have been, just wrapped in a cerecloth, and then ceremonially deposited in the ground. For the richer deceased, that's where coffins would probably have been an attractive option, especially when, if you're like Elizabeth, you need to be laid in state for some time after death to arrange the royal funeral, which took a very long time to organise. The material the coffin was made of would probably have been wood on the outside, but the body itself would have been wrapped in a sort of lead covering inside the wood. So the body would have been preserved. I suppose the wood would have been more aesthetically pleasing. I wish I could go definitive on that. Certainly, the coffin she ended up being buried in was the body wrapped in lead and then covered in a wood casing. But that wasn't necessarily the coffin that she was originally placed in, as we will probably discuss later on.
Now, when Elizabeth died, it would have been typical for a body to be embalmed. But as you slightly mentioned earlier, what did Elizabeth demand happen to her body instead?
Well, my own account is worthless compared to that of Giovanni Scamelli, a wonderful name as well, the Venetian ambassador, Giovanni Scamelli, who was at court at the time of Elizabeth's death in Richmond Palace. And he writes this in his private journal: "The late Queen, by her own orders, has neither been opened or indeed seen by any living soul save 3 of her ladies. It's been taken to Westminster, the palace all hung with mournings. The council waits on her continually with the same ceremony, the same expenditure, down to her very household and table service, as though she were not wrapped in many a fold of cerecloth and hid in a heap of lead, of coffin, of ball, but was walking, as she used to this season, about the alleys of her gardens."
So when you say table service, you're meaning they are literally bringing her meals and everything continually.
It certainly sounds that way. A lot of power play by the dead Queen. I love it. Big dead energy all over the place.
Now, James's research draws attention to a hidden motive behind Elizabeth's opposition to traditional embalming, which says, quote, "Conventional embalmment would have revealed Elizabeth's reproductive organs, the condition of which might have raised difficult questions concerning her moral character or possible heirs." James, is there evidence to suggest Elizabeth was not a virgin queen? We ask loaded questions here on that.
No sense. Oh my goodness, I could annoy so many historians right now. Yes, there's evidence. Here's this conspiracy theory. I'd love to delve into conspiracy, but no, there's no evidence. As a matter of fact, some of the strongest evidence is what we're discussing now, that Elizabeth didn't want to be embalmed. Embalming would traditionally, sort of in the most common sense, have involved the body being opened up, and it's in the middle taken out before the body was sort of seared with a torch to prevent further decay. So it could have laid in space for a bit longer without. By taking out the organs, of course, those observing would have been able to see with some degree of certainty whether or not Elizabeth had ever given birth, or whether her hymen was intact, something like that. The fact that perhaps that didn't happen suggests maybe there was something to hide. But equally, we have no proof that she wasn't embalmed either. Scamelli, who I quoted earlier on, wrote his account of Elizabeth's immediate death, very shortly after she had died. And other accounts of the death by people like John Manningham, John Chamberlain, who were both present, of course, at the time as well, they both argue that Elizabeth was very clearly not embalmed, but also they wrote soon after she had died. So it's possible that she was embalmed after they had all written their accounts. Again, we've got no proof. what happened to her later on would suggest that there was a lot of body to decompose, which again sounds rather gory and sinister. But yeah, I'd love to say there's this conspiracy theory. I can't go definitive on anything.
Was this kind of after-death pampering a normal occurrence in 16th century England, or was Elizabeth suggesting something bizarre for her time period?
Bizarre is the word. Yeah, she was suggesting something utterly strange. And what a maverick she was, what a role model for us all to live by. I think if we could all do this, we would, wouldn't we? Certainly when I die, I'm going to ask my wife to wheel me around for a couple of weeks. It wouldn't have been usual. We've got evidence of people often contemplating their own death. John Donne famously had a portrait painted of him wrapped in a cerecloth long before he died. He just wanted to have a portrait of what he might look like once dead. So she wasn't the first person to anticipate her own death, certainly not. But she probably was one of the first people to act on that anticipation and set orders in place that allowed her to carry on with some semblance of authority after she had passed away. Yeah, not many people would have had that power.
For context, let's be clear here that when we say she asked to be treated like she was alive after she died, we're not talking just a couple of days of mourning. James, how long was it that Elizabeth was on display this way? And where exactly was she? Was she in her staterooms, or was this a public display at Whitehall Palace?
Well, between 3 and 4 weeks, she would have been in the state we've described. Now, whether or not she was actually wheeled around to receive the table service, the dinners that were still being made for her, etc., it's hard to say. Certainly, she was only laid in state, as it were, on public display for the 6 days preceding her burial. And that's when she was in a fine coffin, wrapped in lead, wrapped in wood, covered in an effigy of her living self. So yeah, she was on public display for 6 days, but for the 3 weeks before that, she'd been ruling somehow, something.
From beyond the grave, yes.
Ooh, that was an impression of a ghost, by the way. I didn't just have a seizure.
Oh, well done, yes.
Thank you.
There's a rumor that when Robert Cecil stepped in to defy the Queen's wishes once the smell of her decomposition was simply too much to bear, that she fought back against him from beyond the grave in what can only be described as a gory display. Explain for us, James, what is thought to have occurred, and is there any truth to this legend?
The exciting bit. Well, so Robert Cecil loved Queen Elizabeth. He had the utmost respect for her, and presumably, it would have hurt him deeply to see her sort of on display like this in this unflattering fashion. Eventually, the body started to smell, and Robert Cecil drew a line under it. He overrode her commands, and he arranged the body to be embalmed. Presumably, it was entirely out of respect, but nevertheless, Queen Elizabeth's body wasn't terribly happy with this decision. According to Elizabeth Southwell, in her private records, the Queen made a spectacular comeback, to use Carol Rutter's term. Here's what Southwell wrote. Her body, being seared up, was brought to Whitehall, where being watched every night by 6 several ladies, myself that night there watching, as one of them being all about the body, which was fast nailed up aboard the coffin, with leaves of leaves covered with velvet. Her body and her head break with such a crack that split the wood lead and sailcloth. Whereupon the next day she was fainting. It sounds as though the body exploded in the coffin.
Oh, that's disgusting.
Which is quite impressive. You can imagine, can't you? Is it true or not? Well, that's the question. But there are reasons to doubt Southwell. She came out as a Catholic after Elizabeth's death. So it could have been that this was Catholic propaganda. Certainly that there are pieces of writing long after Elizabeth's death, refer to a papist myth and say no further on the subject. So, this may not have happened, but, it also could have done. Scientifically, it's very possible. If Queen Elizabeth hadn't been embalmed, there would have been a build-up of gases, which is a very attractive thing to talk about right now. I hope you've had your dinner already. According to Catherine Loomis, who writes extensively about Elizabeth Southwell's account, Elizabeth's corpse had been soldered into lead, and then the gases that were produced by decomposing tissues would have accumulated. This may have caused the splitting of flesh, lead, and wood, as well as a distinctive odour. The crack that Southwell heard as the body burst through the coffin could have been the result of gases meeting an open flame, which would have been very possible if the several ladies had been laying in wait with watch candles. It was traditional if you were standing in wait next to a royal corpse, that there would have been candles, obviously, to see by. If any of those gases from the leaking body had hit the flame, then exactly what Southwell describes would have happened. So, yeah, the Queen may have been punishing Robert Cecil beyond the grave. How dare you wrap me up after all I said?
If we have copies of Southwell's account of this today, would that have circulated around England when this occurred? Would Shakespeare have known of this story himself?
In short, we've got no idea. Robert Cecil was a powerful man. He had famously, been in correspondence with King James I for 3 years before Elizabeth died. And he managed to keep that secret long after Elizabeth had passed on. So he was good at keeping secrets, and he was certainly good at withholding information. Southwell writes that Cecil had encouraged the courts that no man durst speak it publicly. Whether they were bribed or whether they were under threat is unclear, but certainly Cecil didn't want the rumours to spread. But nevertheless, there were 6 people present at least, and then there would have had to be people to sew the corpse up, to re-coffin it, to place it back in state for public display. There would have been people aware of what had happened if indeed anything did happen. And if those people were aware, people famously aren't very good at keeping secrets for long. So yeah, word could have spread. We don't know. I'm sorry, I wish I could give you more definitive answers. This is also speculative. I mean, it's so this
well, it really is, because it's such a horrible job to have to do. You'd think if it was you that had to go through this, there's no way you wouldn't tell somebody.
No. Imagine if it was today, it'd be all over Twitter. There'd be a hashtag.
Oh no, that makes it worse. Well, it's clear how this narrative is captivating and worthy of a stage performance, which explains why James's article on his website makes a connection between the ghost of old Hamlet and Elizabeth's postmortem instructions, as both characters enact this kind of living death. However, James, since Shakespeare's Hamlet is estimated to have been written around 1599 to 1601 and was entered in the Stationer's Register in 1602, it couldn't be Elizabeth's post-mortem treatment that inspired Shakespeare's Old Hamlet, because she didn't die until 1603. In light of this legend about Elizabeth, do you think that it's the possible associations that the audience would have made between the two?
Oh, it's so annoying, isn't it? Because the dates don't work out, and the connections are so easy to see. I'd love to be able to say this was definitely influenced by Hamlet, or vice versa. There are certain connections from between the text and Elizabeth Southwell's account that are deliciously close. When Hamlet talks about how his father's bones have burst from their cerements, or how the ghost is described to wander around Wilson Castle in his habit as he lived. It could have been that later edits were made to the original Hamlet transcripts in light of what had happened, but that's very much wishful thinking on my part. Equally, it could be that Southwell's account was inspired by an earlier version of Hamlet, the infamous Hamlet that may have inspired Shakespeare's John Marston in Antonio's Revenge, a text that may well have inspired those plays. There's an interesting thing in Southwell's diary where she describes what happened to another one of Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting, a lady called Elizabeth Guildford. According to Southwell, Guildford saw the ghost of Queen Elizabeth wandering around the Richmond Palace corridors before the Queen had even died, as though the Queen's spirit, or the body politic, the spirit of kingship, was anticipating Elizabeth's death. There are connections there between that and the Hamlet play that just, it's so tempting to say, yes, there's definitely a line of connection here. But of course, you're right. The play was written before Elizabeth died. Was Southwell inspired by it? Is this all a fraud? Or perhaps was the play edited and adjusted after Elizabeth's death? We can't know for sure, can we?
Well, it's very tempting conversation and kind of a chicken or egg conundrum there in that way. I really wanted to support that contention.
You'd be chickening out and not giving you a clear answer.
No, I think it's fascinating. I thought your connections that you made were very strong, and I really wanted that to be true. And so I went looking, and the earliest performance of Hamlet I was able to find actually occurred aboard a ship called the Red Dragon in 1607, which is only 5 years after Elizabeth died, and with her memory very much still alive, even if there isn't the overlap between her death and when the play was written. And I'll hold out hope we'll find some evidence for that in the future. But even if there isn't, I have to think the people who were watching the play for the first time, they wouldn't have been able to miss that association when they saw it performed, considering Elizabeth's after-death experience.
I certainly hope if rumours had spread, they would have spread as far as, where was that performance? Sierra Leone or somewhere outlandish like that? I hope that rumours would have spread. I hope that the people performing this would maybe have made that connection. And I think, if gossip travelled as gossip does, any audience to any subsequent version of Hamlet may have thought about what happened to Queen Elizabeth. It is a play, after all, about the death of one ruler and the overthrow of another. It's a play about anticipating death and dealing with disgusting post-mortem displays. The grave diggers, of course, like to, in this comical interlude before Ophelia's burial, discuss how the water decays bodies. It's a play that's very interested in the grim and the macabre.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd love to. I hope that connections would be made.
Well, the metaphors are there, if not the outright inspiration, for sure. And I know we would love to learn more about this topic. And what are your favorite books or resources you could recommend that we use to go and explore this further?
Oh, that's a really good question. How many am I allowed to name?
Well, let's go with 3. And then if you have more than that, we'll put them in the show notes.
Okay. The big hitters on this sort of subject are Michael Neill's Issue of Death, which I'm sure your listeners are probably aware of already. Catherine Loomis has written an amazing account of Elizabeth Southwell's diary, explaining, the ins and outs of it, whether or not we should believe certain aspects of it. Carol Rutter's Enter the Body inspired my writing on the subject, so that's definitely one to check out. More recently, Sarah Tarlow's Ritual Belief in the Dead in early modern Britain goes into a great deal of detail about burial practices, for example, kinds of things we were discussing earlier on. So lots of gory stuff there for you. I would also, if I'm allowed a cheap plug, if you are interested in life, death, and living death, where they intersect, Google me, check out my PhD thesis. It's available for reading online. Playing Dead, Living Death in Early Modern England. If you've enjoyed discussions about what happens to corpses and their interactions with the theatre, there's lots of stuff in there about how living death deserves to be studied in more detail and in more grisly ways.
Which I have read, and we will link to in the show notes for today's episode. And it is as fascinating as James indicates, so definitely make sure you check those out as well. Now, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so this choice would be in addition to those.
Instead of the works of Shakespeare, could I ask for the complete works of Thomas Middleton? Is that sacrilege on That Shakespeare Girl?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
but you can have both. How about it? We'll give you Shakespeare and Middleton.
Oh no, that's far too dry. Okay, so I've got Shakespeare, I've got the Bible. I'd also like Terry Pratchett's The Night Watch. It's my favourite book ever. Terry Pratchett, rest in peace, is the funniest writer who ever lived, and also I think one of the best observers of humanity. Night Watch is like a Les Mis, but funny and interesting.
What a wonderful choice. Well, you'll be all set up on your desert island there with those choices for sure. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I've got a couple of things hopefully cropping up in the near future. I've just written an article about cannibalism in Hamlet. So Hamlet, not just ghosts, but cannibals as well. That should be winging its way to the Exchanges Journal run by the University of Warwick very soon. For Early Modern Culture Online, I've also written an article about my own teaching practice. I did a project with 16 students called Shake in a Day, which was all about performing a piece of Shakespeare with just 24 hours notice or thereabouts. That was a lot of fun. So yeah, two articles there that hopefully will be sort of winging their ways to wider readership very soon. In the immediate future, of course, I've just left the teaching profession, but my story is not over. My last GCSE students are about to get their results on the 22nd of this month, August. So with any luck, they will have done magnificently. A-level students get theirs on the 15th, so fingers crossed for them as well. Exciting times.
Certainly exciting times. Well, we will look forward to your upcoming publications and for seeing what comes next for James Alsop. Thank you so much for being here and talking with us about The Living Death. This has been delightful.
It's been explosive.
Oh, you had to put that. It has. It's a fascinating topic for sure. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you.
The links to Catherine Loomis's work, links to where you can read the handmaiden South Wales account, as well as a full copy of James Alsop's thesis, which is well worth the read, can all be found crammed in with more history on death, embalming, and the traditions of funerals in early modern England, all inside today's show notes. Find all of this history on early modern England and William Shakespeare at castycash.com/episode 80. That's castycash.com/EP80. When I first started studying Shakespeare, especially as an American, where proper English language is very different on this side of the pond than where Shakespeare was writing, I often mispronounced some of the words that you would find in the plays. Like, originally I said Gloucester instead of Gloucester. Well, that's why I downloaded Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app. It's an easy-to-use, straightforward app that you can download to your phone or tablet on iTunes as well as Google Play. And it lets you search any word from Shakespeare, and then it tells you exactly how to say it with a playable audio guide built right in. Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app is like having a professional voice coach that you can carry in your pocket. Explore all the features of this app and download it right now at castycash.com/Shakespeare app. That's castycash.com/Shakespeare app. If you like the history you learned today, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and consider leaving us a review on iTunes to let other people know what they can find when they go with us behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life. That's it for this week here at That Shakespeare Life. I'm Casty Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.